ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi, I'm Patricia Kabaservice, the host of Politics Now. That's the ABC's podcast covering the political news you need to know when you need to know it. Because politics affects us all. So join me and the ABC's best political journalists for your daily political fix. It's called Politics Now, and you can find it and follow it on the ABC Listen app.
It was another act of political violence in a nation that is far too accustomed to it. Charlie Kirk, a 31-year-old right-wing political activist and staunch Trump supporter, was shot and killed while he addressed a crowd at a US university. Today, Geoff Kabaservice from the centre-right think tank, the Niskanen Center, on what unfolded and why political figures are so unsafe in America. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
Oh my God. Go, run.
In graphic video circulating on social media, Charlie Kirk could be seen speaking to a large crowd from under a gazebo before being knocked off his seat by a gunshot to the throat.
Charlie Kirk, the Conservative activist, has died. He was fatally shot while appearing at the Utah Valley University.
You just hear the gunshot and I'm sorry. It was horrible.
To my great fellow Americans, I am filled with grief and anger at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk on a college campus in Utah. Charlie inspired millions, and tonight, all who knew him and loved him are united in shock and horror. This is a dark moment for America.
Geoff, let's just start by getting a sense of what was happening in the lead-up to this awful shooting. Charlie Kirk, he was speaking in front of a pretty large crowd at Utah Valley University. Just tell me about that, first of all.
So Charlie Kirk, who's been assassinated at age 31, is a conservative movement leader and someone I would characterize as a very successful political entrepreneur. He's the founder of the country's leading conservative student group, Turning Point USA. He's somebody who's been an increasingly important player in Trump world establishment, I guess I would say. Mm-hmm. And he's also a well-known political speaker, influencer, and media figure.
For 12 years, I have been focusing on trying to get young people to believe in America, to believe in conservative principles. And I went to campus after campus, and it was not easy work.
In fact, in just 2024 alone, his content garnered more than, I think it was in the order of 15 billion views across social media platforms. And he was at Utah Valley University in the course of his trademark political activism, which is going to college campuses and talking with students and debating liberal students under a banner saying, "Prove me wrong." And that's exactly what he was doing and where he was when he was shot by a gunman whose identities or motives are as yet unknown.
Yeah. Do we know what he was telling the crowd at the time?
Well, ironically, the subject was gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you know how many transgender Americans have been mass shooters over the last 10 years?
Too many.
So, about 20 minutes into this talk, he was struck by a bullet. There were, of course, a number of people filming this on their phones at the time, and really chaotic scenes afterwards. It is dreadful.
Yes, and I actually feel I should emphasize this. This event is widely seen across the country as horrifying. It has been lamented and condemned across the political spectrum. I believe every living former president has issued a statement condemning this horrible action. And, I did not know Charlie Kirk personally, and I disagreed with him on quite a number of things, but he was a son, he was a husband, he was a father who leaves behind a 3-year-old daughter and a 1-year-old son, and this is a terrible tragedy on a personal level, but also for the country and our politics.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Donald Trump, when he announced Mr. Kirk's death via social media, of course there was an outpouring of grief, as you say, across the political spectrum. Fox News presenters, they were actually breaking down on air.
Charlie Kirk, according to the President of the United States, is dead. I don't really know where you go from here. I don't know where we go from here in a news program, and I don't know where we go from here in America.
It's a shock for the entire country, I would have thought.
Yes and no. You and I know who Charlie Kirk is. People involved in politics know very well who he is. I've actually been aware of him since the 2012 election cycle when he was, I think, only 18 or 19 years old. The average American on the street probably doesn't know who Charlie Kirk was, nor do they have any sense of what Turning Point Action or his campaign arm are. Most people simply are not that plugged in or that online. However, Charlie Kirk did have a much greater audience among young people and also among people who watch videos on TikTok, where he was, I think, probably the leading conservative influencer.
Let's then, Geoff, just have a bit more of a look at who Charlie Kirk was. He was, as you mentioned, a founder of a right-wing youth activist organisation. He had done a lot, hadn't he, in his short time. He, as you say, was only 31, but he'd really made an impact, that's for sure.
Sure. I mean, he essentially, thanks largely to his own efforts, grew, what just was one person's efforts online and on college campuses into $100 million enterprise. He's a complicated figure, too, in the sense that he took a lot of positions that I would regard as extreme. During the pandemic, he was a big promoter of ivermectin as a solution to COVID, which, of course, it was not. And he also was an election denier, saying that Donald Trump had won the election when, of course, he did not. He lost to Joe Biden in 2020. And, he also promoted candidates whom I thought were too extreme to win in the general election, which actually proved to be the case. However, Charlie Kirk actually was, by the end of his too short life, a relatively mainstream figure in the Republican Party as it has become. And actually was very much the target of young people who are even further to the right, because he, had spoken out quite a lot about the tendencies toward anti-Semitism among the so-called Groypers, who are the overly online followers of very far-right quasi-Nazi figures like Nick Fuentes. And he was actually speaking out about the need, particularly for disengaged young men, to drop some of their extreme rhetoric, to dump the online conspiracy theories, to join a church, to get married, to start a family. And his signature platform, I guess, of debating people was in itself relatively moderate, right? I mean, this is about discourse. People were free to disagree with him. I thought he was sometimes a bit slippery in his rhetoric, but I generally approved of this idea that you meet people, you talk civilly to them, you argue your point of view, they argue their point of view, perhaps one of you changes your mind. So I think this is a loss to the public discourse, generally, even within Trump world.
But he was willing to spread, if you like, unsupported information, hence that banner, I suppose, that he has up.
Yeah, and then this is why it's difficult to actually say, what the mainstream is and what the extreme is in the Republican Party nowadays.
Well, he was very important, of course, to Donald Trump, wasn't he? He helped, in a sense, in his re-election.
He did. I mean, I think Kirk himself would not have said this, but people in his organization would have said that they deserved a lot of credit for Trump's 2024 presidential victory because, again, they were among the most active organizations in getting out the vote efforts, particularly among young people. And, the fact is that 18 to 30-year-olds nationally moved more than 10 percentage points towards Trump in 2024. Compared to 2020, there were big jumps in states where Turning Point was most active, such as Arizona, where the organization is now based, and also among Black and Latino men who were a major subject of their get-out-the-vote efforts. So he was a big deal. He was personally close to Donald Trump Jr. and also to J.D. Vance. And he also had boosted J.D. Vance as Trump's vice presidential candidate. So yes, he was a big player in the Republican world.
All right, well, Geoff, let's look now at the implications of this awful event. What does it say, first of all, about the political environment in the United States, if anything?
To be honest, Sam, I find that a little hard to answer because, there are academic studies of which I am aware which do track political assassinations in different countries over time, and they do point to some common factors that seem worrying to us here and now in the United States because, of course, most of these assassinations more often occur in countries with strong political polarization, social fragmentation, in situations where partisans believe the stakes are existential. Of course, that certainly describes the United States at this present moment. Of course, in a country with so many guns, when someone wants to try to assassinate a political figure, they're going to have easy access to weaponry, and that makes this even more alarming. But on the other hand, if you go back to the 1960s, the cycle of political assassinations began with President John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963. That was a time when the country was relatively homogenous in terms of its ethnicity, relatively politically united, relatively unpolarized. So political assassinations, by definition, are very unusual and shocking events. So sometimes it can be hard to draw lines to say this is why they happen versus this is why they don't happen.
Well, of course, Donald Trump himself survived 2 assassination attempts last year. What he says and does in the days ahead will be significant, won't it? His base will be saddened and angered, I would have thought, by what's occurred. So the language now, I would think, would be important.
Yeah, it seems a bit much to expect Donald Trump to moderate his language in this moment of national tragedy, and so far he's given no indication of doing that, of course.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
This also is coming in the context, as you said, of 2 previous assassination attempts on Trump and other episodes of political violence. We could point to, for example, the assassination of the Minnesota House Speaker, Melissa Hortman, and her husband just a few months ago. The assassination of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, the killings at the Washington Jewish Center here in town just a few months ago, the break-in attempt to try to kidnap Nancy Pelosi that resulted in severe injuries to her husband, Paul Pelosi. There could be a worry that, as in the 1960s, this cycle of political violence is on the upswing. And, assassinations or even assassination attempts tend to inspire extreme rhetoric. They can inspire copycats. They can inspire reprisals, and they can inspire government responses. And this is particularly worrisome given that Trump, as we know, really disdains the rule of law, checks on executive power, and has spoken out about certain forms of civil liberties. So, yes, I think we're all on pins and needles waiting to see what Trump is going to do in response.
Well, what does it mean then, Geoff, for stability in the US, for democracy in the US? Are politicians, are political figures actually safe in America?
I know a number of people who are not politicians, but are political figures, maybe in the sense that Charlie Kirk was. In other words, they're people who are out in the public, making strong statements, partisan or otherwise, about what goes on. Of course, there's a great deal of worry on their part as to whether they are going to need security now. And it's worth pointing out that the event where Charlie Kirk was shot included university security, and it included some of his own personal security because there had been death threats against him in the past. So, this is worrisome, but I would actually even broaden that to say that, we may be seeing the coming of an era where people simply have less political freedom than we've become used to in this country. Because if you are fearful of speaking out because you think there are going to be violent reprisals against you for offending the wrong side, then you're not really free. And, I would argue that the same is true if you don't feel free going out in public spaces. So, yeah, it's a dark moment in this country.
Geoff Kabaservice is a political scientist from the centre-right think tank, the Niskanen Center, based in Washington, D.C. This episode was produced by Cinema Nippard and Jessica Wukyanov. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.